Hi, everyone. Please add your name to the attendees list and we'll start in a minute. Right, I don't see any topics in the document. I know that AWS wanted to discuss logging implementation. I don't know if anybody from AWS is in the call. Here's
Yep,
yeah.
I'm here.
Okay. Hi, do you want to introduce yourself? I don't think we've met.
Sure. So I'm Mark. I'm currently an intern working at AWS. And Riley, which I'm sure most of you know, has given me and a coworker, Karen, a task to create a logging prototype for C++. So right now, we're just looking through other logging libraries that exist in C++ and seeing all of the features that they have. And we're like compiling a big list of features that we want to have for our own logging library.
Okay. Do you know the specification of the logging, the high-level overview of what we expect from logging libraries to do? Do you know where to find it? It's part of the OpenTelemetry specification.
Is that the log data model you're referring to?
Not the data model. No. Let me give you the link. One second.
Sure.
Also, what's the intent? Do you plan to implement a brand new logging library, or
Yes.
you want? Okay. So that's, I guess, slightly different from what we wanted to do for most of the languages, where there is more or less standard logging library, which is not the case for C++, as far as I know. So that may be one of the languages where you actually rightfully need to go and implement a new one. Yeah, but I'd like to maybe, if you're doing any sort of design for the logging library within the C++ SIG, I'd like to maybe be involved in that, be part of that discussion to see
for sure.
what do you guys want to do, right?
Right.
When is the C++ SIG happening?
It's on Mondays at 4 p.m. Pacific, I'm pretty sure.
We know if there are plans to discuss this logging library in the C++ SIG next Monday.
We haven't put anything in the Google Doc yet, but we're planning on talking about it briefly.
Okay. Can you please let me know, if possible, before the SIG meeting, if there is an intent to have that discussion?
Sure. We have a couple documents that we created as well, so I can share the link with you.
Yes, that would be good. Please do share.
Sure.
1 second, I still need to send you the link I promised. So I'm putting it here in the Zoom chat. This is the higher level understanding of how we think the logs in OpenTelemetry should work. There are some references to also to how we think the logging libraries should work there.
Yes, yeah, I remember looking at this document. I just forgot.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, I remember reading that for languages with the really specified logging library, that it would be better just to create like an extender for that so that we don't have to implement everything ourselves.
Right.
But yeah, I don't think C++ has one of those libraries.
Right. Yeah. So for Java, particularly, David is working on an extender.
Yeah.
Some of the existing logging libraries. For C++, yeah, I guess there is no established one. There's no one logging library. Yeah. So good.
One consideration I definitely would put in as you design this is to separate the logging transfer from the logging user interface. So make sure that, like, because there's a bunch of stuff that just, you know, taking a log entry and passing it off to wherever you're going to export. If you make that a different unit than, you know, the actual, you know, log.debug call,
yeah,
then that allows that piece to be used by other libraries as well. So
right. Yeah, we were thinking of having like a provider class and then the actual logger class. Perfect. So the provider, it would kind of like return a logger, which you could write to, but then the implementation of where it's being written to would be put inside the provider, which I think is how C# does it in the iLogger class.
Okay, so yes, but so that's actually, so if you have it as a provider that returns a logger, so the provider returns your user interface basically, then you're that's basically that coupling I'm talking about, right?
Right.
So, and you know, I guess you could use that as an adapter as well, but you know, there's a lot of we can definitely talk about it, but trying to think about it in terms of like another C++ logging library. You know, how do you also give them the leg up so that they can also output to OpenTelemetry and they don't use our logger or translate to our like, you know, we don't want to have to go through two user layers.
Yeah, so I think that's important, right? You are implementing a logging library, so the end users can use that, right? But think of some other logging libraries, other C++ logging libraries who may be interested in adding support for sending logs to OpenTelemetry or in OpenTelemetry compliant manner. So you would want to provide some sort of an SDK, as we call it in Java logs, for them to make it easier to turn that logging library into something that is also OpenTelemetry compliant.
Gotcha.
Okay, so you mentioned there are some design documents that you can share. Can you please put the links into the Zoom chat?
Sure. So the one document we have here is about our investigation with other logging libraries. So for example, like with Python's logging library and Log4j in Java. And so we just compiled a big list of common features they all have. And then we also looked at logging libraries that exist in C++, and we found like functionalities that they have too. So we're just trying to find a big list of features that we want to have in our own custom API. And it's not perfectly written yet. We're still doing a bunch of revisions on that.
Okay,
but
this is a pretty big document. Thank you.
Yeah, it is. A lot of the stuff's in the appendix.
Okay, good. What else? Any other topics to discuss?
I have one topic related to FluentBit and OpenTelemetry working together on Kubernetes.
Sure.
So maybe actually I will share my screen. That will be easier if you don't mind. Yeah. Because I think this is one of those things that are easier to show rather than describe. However, I have prepared this document and posted a link in the meeting notes. So if anyone is curious, then I have described what I was doing. But essentially, for the past couple of weeks, I was working on some extensions to OpenTelemetry Collector, adding support for logs to some of the processors. and I realized that we already have some nice capabilities with OpenTelemetry Collector for logs. So maybe we could try enabling it and running it as a part of a pretty standard processing chain for logs. So for Kubernetes, one of the ways to collect logs, I think that the most standard one is to use FluentBit. And there are several charts available. This is one of them. I think this is going to be the official FluentBit chart soon. So I was checking what's needed to make it run with OpenTelemetry Collector. And this is essentially just as a reference, pretty much this scenario where we have third-party logs. So there's FluentBit running in some daemon set and collecting logs from applications on Kubernetes from pods, essentially from standard out, and forwarding them to OpenTelemetry Collector. So the default configuration for this Helm chart is following. So we have some input defined where it's essentially fetching all container logs as well as some systemd logs. Then it goes through some filters which extract some metadata tags from Kubernetes in FluentBit, and then it might be configured to send it to Elasticsearch. I think in this example only Elasticsearch. So what I have done in my example, I have changed two of these configuration entries. I have removed filters, and I have changed output to send it to an OpenTelemetry Collector instance, which has forward protocol. Now, one challenge, if we want to have Kubernetes metadata tagging, is how to associate each log with the source, with the pod, essentially. So typically for traces, we either have this information coming from the client, or we can associate the source connection IP address, and that way know which pod is the source of the data. For logs, it won't work, because if FluentBit is running in daemon set setting, then it can collect logs from several pods actually. But fortunately, we have one source of the information, the name of the file with the log. So whenever FluentBit is looking at this data, the file name actually contains the name of the pod, the name of the ID of the container, and other information, which are put into fluent.tag value. So recently, I think it's not merged yet, but the PR is ready. One of our colleagues was working on attributes processor for logs. So I'm using this attributes processor. I have defined an action that takes this Fluent tag key, and using regular expression extracts some information. So I'm extracting pod name here, namespace name, container ID, and etc. And this actually works. So I have my small toy Docker desktop with Kubernetes running locally. I have installed FluentBit with this slight changes to the configuration. I have installed OpenTelemetry Collector with this manifest. And now I can see that I have these pods running and connecting to each other. And I'm, in this example, sending data to JSON file just to see if I'm collecting any logs from my pod. And this is where the challenge happens, or like the thing that I would like to consult. Because what we have, so first of all, we have this Fluent tag attribute. We have the original log, but we have this Fluent tag attribute, and it was nicely expanded into these attributes, the pod name, namespace name, container name, and etc. However, this brings two questions. The first one is that our Kubernetes processor we have right now, it can match only pod IP, not pod name. It's simple thing to change it to pod name, but I just wanted to check what's your opinion on that, if that fits the processor, how it works. The second challenge, perhaps more interesting, is that with logs, typically we're getting attributes at the log level, and most of our processors, or many of our processors, are working with resources, and resources, at least for data coming from FluentBit, will be empty. So I was wondering if maybe we should create another processor for logs, but maybe not only for logs, that could group the records by some attributes. So for example, I could define that I want to group all records having the same Fluent tag together, or maybe any other attribute. Having those two things, we could pretty much replace FluentD for many of the workloads where it's being used with OpenTelemetry Collector, which I think is pretty cool. So
yeah, this is very nice. Thank you. So a couple comments on the. First of all, the names of the attributes. I think we could use the OpenTelemetry's conventions. So, for example, pod name in OpenTelemetry, it's k8s.pod.
Exactly.
We could do that. Now, you're saying you still would want to have an enrichment done by Kubernetes processor. That's your question. And
yeah, sure.
It currently uses the IP address as the identification of the pod. And you're saying there is no IP address, so the Kubernetes processor is not going to be able to detect, or the IP address is actually not of the pod, it's the node IP address, so it's useless for our purposes. So your question is whether we could modify the Kubernetes processor to use a different key for identification of the pod and then doing the enrichment, right? That's what you're asking.
Yeah, exactly. So I have opened an issue for that, and this, from code perspective, this is a very simple change because we have a map that contains this like IP to metadata things, and we can just copy it with the pod name, and that could work. And I was thinking about ability to configure it like that.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable. Do we only get pod name and namespace? Is there a UID of the pod? Maybe that's a single better identification, right, for the pod.
Yeah, so we're essentially getting following pod name, the namespace, container name, and container ID.
Okay. No UID. Okay. Yeah, I think that's reasonable. That's you're right. That should be easy to do. We should just need to maintain another map from the name to the pod information. Whether it should be a configuration or option or no, I don't know. Maybe we'll need to think about that. Do we automatically decide how we identify the pod? Is it based on IP address, based on name? Maybe it's optional. I don't know, but sounds reasonable. So yeah, if you have the proposal there, I think we can have a look at that. But I think it's a useful thing to do. But do definitely use the OpenTelemetry semantic conventions for attribute names.
Yes, and this brings that. Yeah, because this brings another problem. When we are using regular expressions in attributes to extract this information, where we are limited to only certain characters in the capture group names, and I think that we cannot use dot. So we cannot use the names that are matching the conventions we have defined in the specification. So I was wondering if maybe we should have some sort of translation configuration.
We have the renaming action, not renaming. We have copying and deleting action. So essentially that's the renaming. You can do this extraction first and then do the renaming afterwards. It should be possible to do in the same attributes processor.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about this too. And the last item is this grouping capability, because all those attributes are at the record level rather than resource level. And I think that, well, we can change the behavior to tag the record level, but perhaps it would be better to move those attributes to resource, because for many log formats, this will be always the case, that the resource will be empty and we'll just get records with attributes, and that might be a common scenario.
Yeah. So that's essentially a grouping by certain attributes, right? That you would want to extract as a resource. I think that's reasonable too. That can be a processor. How widely will be used? I don't know. But in this particular case, I think that's what we're getting. And probably for many of other log sources, right? Because they are flattened when we read them, they also come without the resource. So that's, yeah, I think that would be useful to have.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So one other comment regarding the chart. We have very recently created a new repository for Helm charts at OpenTelemetry. And Dmitry already added there a help chart for OpenTelemetry collector deployment, which currently supports traces and metrics on that particular Helm chart. The configuration specifies only traces and metrics. We could add logging support, like what you did, right? We could add logging support to that as well. The only concern I would have is that for logging, we also include FluentBit, which is an additional dependency, which may not be always desirable. So perhaps maybe it's a variation of the chart, if it's possible to configure it, not to the, let's say I don't need logging. I want to use that particular chart, but I only want to use traces and metrics, so I don't want to deploy. I don't want to have the FluentBit part of it. If we could make it an option in the chart, then that would be great to have one chart where you deploy and you get all three signals. Otherwise, maybe it's an additional separate alternate chart with all three signals. But what I'm saying is that there is a repository. We have a place already for this sort of things. So I think it would be very beneficial to whatever you're doing to try to put there in that particular repository, so we have the official OpenTelemetry chart for the collector.
Yeah, absolutely. And with Helm chart, it's fairly easy to toggle options. So it can be like turned off by default, for example, and enabled only for someone that want to play with it, at least in the initial phase.
Okay, I think.
Yeah, I mean, again, Tigran, to your point, this is Alita. That's a good idea, but it's just that, isn't this experimental still, or, you know?
Yes.
So we just toggle it off.
FluentBit is also, yes, and you're right. So we need to be a bit careful with this, right? I wouldn't want to make it the default way of deploying everything that we have.
Right.
Especially since we're approaching GA, for now, we want only stable and well-tested functionality to go.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we could mark in Helm chart development,
right.
you know, like a developer version, and just have it available there.
Yeah. I think it would be useful to also check what Dmitry does. Just yesterday, I believe he mentioned he wanted to do something like this. He may already also have something there. So just to make sure there is no duplicate. I'll send you the link to the new repository for Helm charts. You can create an issue maybe there, and we can have a discussion in the issue. So here's the chart. Okay. Good. Anything else, anyone?
So Tigran, just wanted to again say hi to David as well as PMM. We were on a thread earlier, and you know, as you may know, two of our interns we have been working with Riley and Max on the C++ team and the C++ SIG to identify a logging implementation and work on it with two of our interns working there. So again, would definitely like to learn from David's and you know, PMM's implementations, and was wondering what is the best way to coordinate that, because we do have an regular sync on the C++ SIG, but again, it is more towards also, you know, adding to the logging spec and having initial POCs that actually can add value back to the overall spec.
Yeah, we've just had that very brief discussion around that. Yeah. So I'd like to attend whenever there is a discussion in C++ SIG about logging. I'd like to attend that.
Okay.
To see how I can help.
Sure.
I also have the design doc. So I will have a look at the C++ logging library design doc. I'll have a look at that. Okay. And do definitely attend this particular meeting, and we can be in sync around what is happening. There's also the ongoing implementation that David works on for Java. I believe for C++, it's going to be somewhat different because there is no canonically accepted.
There's no
logging
log4j.
library yeah. Right.
Exactly.
So the approach, and that's within the how we thought it's going to be, right? For certain languages,
Yes.
we will
Yeah.
likely want to do full logging libraries. But yes, I'll have a look at the design. I will just let me know if you can when
Awesome.
there
Yeah,
is
will do.
intended to be a discussion in
Yep.
C++ SIG on this topic. I will come and we'll take it from there.
Great. Will do. Thanks.
All right. Yeah, this is exciting. We're adding more of the logging support to OpenTelemetry.
Yes.
We were somewhat frozen state because of the efforts to release the traces and specs. Hopefully that's almost out of the way, and we can then work more on the logging aspects. This is very good.
So Tigran, also on another aspect, I don't know if our interns highlighted that, but it is, we have also would like to kind of build out an exporter for logging for C++ right now for Elasticsearch, and specifically the open source version of Elasticsearch. So that's also one of our goals in terms of having an, data sync. Again, was wondering if that's something that, we're starting to think about or too early.
Exporter in the collector, you mean, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely highly desirable, actually, right? We want to have as many exporters as we want. So that's very welcome. If you want to contribute something like that, we definitely want to have it.
I mean, we are planning to, as we implement the log, the MVP, at least for the logs, support in C++, at least to test it out, have an Elasticsearch exporter developed with it, which our interns are going to work on. So again, that could be easily extended for the collector also. That is another, version of it, but of course.
Yeah. And there is a fair bit of support already in the collector for that. So it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Jump into.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to write an exporter right now, you can. There already are exporters in the collector. I mean, the only thing worth noting is, given that it's not stable, there could be breaking changes. There's just the maintenance of it, but exporters already exist, definitely desirable, shouldn't need to wait. You can definitely get started now if you wanted to.
Yeah. I mean, we have been building exporters for the collector for metrics, so totally understand. Cool. That's awesome. Thank you.
Good. Anything else, anyone? Okay. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.